everybody, and thank you so much for joining us at today's UN meeting. At this meeting, we will be discussing how to create the best global culture, pulling from all the countries from around the world. To do this, we'll be using Hofstede's cultural dimensions theory, which is a framework used for cross-cultural communication. It shows the effects of a society's culture on the values of its members and how these values relate to behavior, using a structure derived from factor analysis.
So before each cultural dimension, we're going to have an educational consultant explain each cultural dimension. We will then give each country the opportunity to describe what their culture and society looks like. The educational consultant will come back and objectively explain the cultural dimensions of the USA and Belarus.
The first dimension of Hofstede's cultural framework that we will be discussing is power distance. This dimension deals with the fact that all individuals in societies are not equal, and it expresses the attitude of the culture towards these power inequalities amongst us. Power distance is defined as the extent to which the less powerful members of organizations within a country expect and accept that power is distributed unequally. It has to do with the fact that a society's inequality is endorsed by the followers as much as it is by the leaders.
Starting off with a very quick question, what is power distance?
What's that?
So power distance is defined as the extent to which the less powerful members of institutions and organizations within a country expect and accept the power that is distributed unequally.
That's right, Belarus. So can you tell me about the power distance in your country?
With our high score of 95, in Belarus, the power lies with the higher class.
That's tyranny! No power for the people? Wow, you guys really don't care about your citizens. That's ridiculous.
Not quite. As a society, we accept the unequal distribution.
Well, here in America, the power lies with the people.
Do you mind explaining that a bit more?
Happily, we get to vote for the representatives that speak for us. To objectively explain the United States power distance, the United States maintains a moderately low score of 40 on the Power Distance Index. This is highlighted by the democratic process of the government and peaceful transfer of power. Speaking of power, Americans believe the use of power should be legitimate, and those in power are subject to the public's ideas and opinions on whether the power is being used for good or evil. As a result, the nation is less dependent on hierarchy and more focused on creating equality, as stated in many government.
Belarus's power distance has a high score of 95, and Belarus is a nation where power holders are very distant in society. People in the society accept a hierarchical order in which everybody has a place and which needs no further justification. Hierarchy is seen as reflecting inherent inequalities, and the different distribution of power justifies the fact that power holders have more benefits than the less powerful in society. The discrepancy between the less and the more powerful people leads to a great importance of status symbols.
For the next dimension, we'll be discussing individualism versus collectivism. The fundamental issue addressed by this dimension is the degree of interdependence a society maintains among its members. It has to do with whether people's self-image is defined in terms of I or we. In an individualist society, people are only supposed to look out for themselves and their direct family. In a collectivist society, people belong to in-groups that take care of them in exchange for unquestioning loyalty.
Okay, moving on to the next dimension. So wow, the United States, you really do seem united. Does that mean that you're a collectivist culture?
Hell no, that's communism. In America, you only look out for yourself and your family. We are expected to be self-reliant and display initiative.
My God, not everything is communist. We identify as a collectivist society, but we prioritize loyalty to our neighbor and not our government. In other words, we emphasize the needs of our group over an individual because we are stronger together.
The American premise of liberty and justice for all is evidence of the explicit emphasis on equal rights in all aspects of American society and government. Theoretically, individuals in America are all equal. Within American organizations, hierarchy is established for convenience. Superiors are accessible, and managers rely on individual employees and teams for their expertise. Both managers and employees expect to be consulted, and information is shared frequently. At the same time, communication is informal, direct, and participative to a degree. The society is loosely knit, in which the expectation is that the people look after themselves and their immediate families only, and should not rely too much on authorities for support. In other words, if everyone is equal, then you should be able to sustain yourself and close relatives as does everybody else. There is also a high degree of geographical mobility in the United States. Americans are the best joiners in the world. However, it is often difficult, especially among men, to develop deep friendships or relationships. There is a high level of superficiality in America. Americans are accustomed to doing business and interacting with people they do not know well. This can be highlighted by the way Americans refer to the people they do not know well as friends, instead of acquaintance, as they are likely not familiar with the emotional depth required for deep friendships. Consequently, Americans are not shy about approaching acquaintances in order to obtain or seek information. In fact, in the business world, employees are expected to be self-reliant and display initiative when seeking anything from information to goals.
Belarus is a collectivist culture. This is evident in their early integration and close, long-term commitment to a strong, cohesive in-group. These societies foster strong relationships where everyone takes responsibility for and protects fellow members of their groups. Loyalty is paramount and overrides most other societal rules. In these societies, offense leads to shame and loss of face.
The next dimension we will be discussing is masculinity versus femininity. A high score on masculine dimension indicates that the society will be driven by competition, achievement, and success, with success being defined by the winner or best in field. This value system starts in childhood and continues throughout one's life, both in work and leisure pursuits. A low score on the feminine dimension means that the dominant values in that society are caring for others and the quality of life. A feminine society is one where quality of life is the sign of success, and standing out from the crowd is not admirable. The fundamental issue here is what motivates people: wanting to be the best, masculine, or liking what you do, feminine.
Okay, moving on to the next question. Is your culture masculine or feminine? Okay, do you want to be the best, or do you want to like what you do?
The best? We are the best. America is great.
Wow, you really do like to talk about that, huh?
Well, what's the point in being successful if you can't brag about it? Status is everything.
Doesn't that bring a lot of conflict then?
Well, conflict brings competition, which drives growth, innovation, and being the best of the best.
Really? That seems so harmful. In Belarus, we only see conflict as a weapon that divides and endangers the well-being of all of us. When one of us are in danger, we are all in danger.
The score of the United States on masculinity is very high at 62, and this can be seen at the typical American behavioral patterns. The high masculinity score, coupled with the high individualism, results in Americans showing their masculine drive individually, which is reflected in the following. Behavior in school, work, and play are based on the shared values that people should strive to be the best and that winner takes all. As a result, Americans tend to readily display and talk freely about their successes and achievements in life. Being successful, per se, is not the great motivator in American society, but being able to show one's successes. Many American assessment systems are based on precise targeting setting, by which American employees can show how well of a job they did. There exists a can-do mentality, which creates a sense of empowerment in this society, as it is believed that there is always a possibility to do things in a better way. Typically, Americans live to work so they can obtain monetary rewards and attain higher status based on how good one can be compared to the peers. Many white-collar workers will move to a more upscale neighborhood after each substantial promotion. It is believed that a certain degree of conflict will bring out the best in people, as it is the goal to always be the winner. As a consequence, we see a lot of polarization in court cases in America. This mentality nowadays undermines the American premise of liberty and justice for all mentioned earlier. Rising inequality is endangering democracy because of a widening gap among the classes may slowly push power distance up and individualism down.
On the contrary, Belarus's score is 20, which characterizes it as a feminine society. In feminine cultures, the focus is on working in order to live. People in such societies value equality, solidarity, and quality of their working lives. It is important to make sure that everyone is included. Conflicts can be threatening because they endanger the well-being of everybody. They are resolved by compromise and negotiation.
The next dimension we will discuss is uncertainty avoidance, which has to do with the way that a society deals with the fact that the future can never be known. Should we try to control the future or just let it happen? This ambiguity brings with it anxiety, and different cultures have learned how to deal with this anxiety in different ways. The extent to which the members of a culture feel threatened by ambiguous or unknown situations have created beliefs and institutions that try to avoid these is reflected in the score on uncertainty avoidance.
Let's talk about how your country deals with uncertainty. Belarus?
Stated, conflict and uncertainty are threats to our society. So to avoid ambiguity, we follow strict rules, laws, and policies to minimize the level of uncertainty that threatens us. We are aware of our apprehension towards change, but it's the optimal way of life when we care about all the individuals, and when one of us is harmed, we all are.
Cute, but what is that gonna do? Life and its hardships will never stop for emotions, laws, or rules. Doesn't matter how hard you try to avoid it.
Americans score low at 46, indicating they tend to be more tolerant of ideas or opinions from anyone and allow the freedom of expression, as is protected by their government. At the same time, Americans do not require a lot of rules and are less emotionally expressive than the higher scoring cultures. This is highlighted by the American attitude of facts over feelings.
Belarus has a very high score with 95 on uncertainty avoidance, demonstrating that as a nation, they see mechanisms to avoid ambiguity. People do not readily accept change and are very risk averse.
Now moving on to long-term and short-term orientation. This dimension describes how every society has to maintain some links with its own past while dealing with the challenges of the present and future. And societies prioritize these two existential goals differently. Nordic societies which score low on this dimension, for example, prefer to maintain time-honored traditions and norms while viewing societal change with suspicion. Those with a culture which scores high, on the other hand, take a more pragmatic approach. They encourage thrift and efforts in modern education as a way to prepare for the future. Moving on to the next question, do you believe that traditions and policies from the past should stay the same or update as society changes?
I don't mean to brag, but come on, we did get it right the first time.
Wait, do you not think that your country should be updated since its inception?
Why should we? Just like the church, America doesn't need to change.
What about updates in science, global warming, or human rights? Aren't the amendments considered changes? Here in Belarus, we stay updated with the times to promote the greatest good for the greatest number. We accept that we might not always get things right on the first try, but that mindset has helped us grow as a respected nation.
The United States scores normative on the fifth dimension with a low score of 26. This is reflected by the following. Americans are prone to analyze new information to check whether it is true, as they are skeptical because of how much new information is produced. Thus, the culture does not make most Americans logical, but this should not be confused with the fact that Americans are practical, being reflected by the can-do mentality mentioned earlier. This polarization is strengthened by the fact that many Americans develop their morals from a variety of sources and have very strong yet varying ideas about what is good and what is evil. This may concern issues such as abortion, use of drugs, euthanasia, weapons, the size and rights of the government versus the states or citizens.
The U.S. is the one and only Caucasian country in the world since the beginning of the 20th century where visiting church has increased. This increase is also evident in some post-Soviet republics such as Russia. American businesses measure their performance on a short-term basis, with profit and loss statements being issued on a quarterly basis. This also drives individuals to strive for quick results within the workplace. With a very high score of 81, Belarusian culture is shown to be highly pragmatic. In societies with pragmatic orientation, people believe that the truth very much depends on the situation, context, and time. They show an ability to adapt traditions easily to change conditions, a strong propensity to save and invest, thriftiness, and perseverance in achieving results. Next question.
Okay, moving on. How do we feel about work hard, play hard?
We love it.
The last dimension is indulgence versus restraint. One challenge that confronts humanity now and in the past is the degree to which small children are socialized. Without socialization, we do not become human. This dimension is defined as the extent to which people try to control their desires and impulses, based on the way they were raised. A tendency toward a relatively weak control over their impulses is called indulgence, whereas a relatively strong control over their urges is called restraint. Cultures can be described as indulgent or restrained. Aren't you guys known for going out of your way to punish drug abuse, yet you have the highest rates of drug abuse?
So, we work hard so we can enjoy the fruit of our labor.
Well, we don't mean to be pessimistic, but we do not prioritize leisure time and try our best to restrain ourselves and our desires. We restrain ourselves from overindulging like hedonists.
What's a hedonist?
It's like a rock star.
Oh.
The United States scores as an indulgent society with a score of 68 on the sixth dimension. This is reflected by the lavish lifestyles of the rich and famous being touted as the new American dream. Private jets, closets full of designer brands, and purses worth $250,000 each, multiple houses, private chefs, and glam squads are all the new normal for Americans to see and attempt to achieve. Although most will not reach the level of wealth in their lifetime, highlighting the lack of logical thinking but can-do attitude mentioned previously. More examples of this include the obesity rates, drug usage, lump sum spending or shopping sprees, and the general emphasis placed on being seen as luxurious.
Belarus's very low score of 15 indicates a culture characterized by great restraint. Restrained societies have a tendency towards cynicism and pessimism. Also, they do not put much emphasis on leisure time and control the gratification of their desires. People have the perception that their actions are, or should be, restrained by social norms and feel that indulging themselves is somewhat wrong. Thank you, USA and Belarus, for your input.
As contrasting as it was, we will take your cultural dimensions into consideration. We will now be discussing the dimensionality of culture in the future.
Critics have a lot to say about the Hofstede model, specifically regarding its validity in the future.
The article, Dimensionalizing Cultures, the Hofstede Model in Context, goes into depth about the future of the cultural dimensions.
Many critics believe that the number of dimensions should be expanded.
But additional dimensions are only meaningful if they are both conceptually and statistically independent from those already available, and they should also be validated by significant correlations with conceptually related external measures.
There is an epistemological reason as to why the dimensions will always be small. The dimensions should not be seen as concrete.
They do not exist in a tangible sense. They are constructs. If they exist, it is in our own minds.
Within the dimensional model, cultures can, of course, change their position on a dimension.
Some authors predict that new technologies will make societies more and more similar.
Technological modernization is an important force towards culture change, and it leads to partly similar developments in different societies. But there is not the slightest proof that it wipes out variety on other dimensions. It may even increase differences, as on the basis of pre-existent value systems, societies cope with technological modernization in very different ways. Despite the criticism of Hofstede's model from other scholars, we at the UN believe this framework is valuable and will continue to be. Many differences between the national cultures were already recognizable in the 1900s, 1800s, and even the 1700s. Therefore, we believe there is no reason why these dimensions could not be valuable in the future.
At the UN, we do recognize that one culture is not better than the other. The US and Belarus, though different, are both viable nations on their own, which goes to show that no dimension is better than the other, and all cultures can stand to learn from one another.